Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is David Waller. I'll be leading today's session on Rollbar Analytics. This is a part of the Rollbar Academy series where we started with Rollbar Basics, and we've sort of worked through sort of the order of operations and also from basic to advanced to get to some of these more advanced topics. For anyone that's looking for other general knowledge, I'll share some links towards the end, but today's session is going to focus on Rollbar Analytics. We'll define that, but basically this has to do with all of the data that exists within your Rollbar account. Housekeeping, this recording will be shared. We'll post this similarly to how we've done our other Rollbar Academy sessions. By default, all attendees are muted, and we have a number of ways to ask questions in the chat system in the Q&A. And if we do need to do spoken questions, if somebody does have something that is best asked verbally, then we'll make time at the end to review any open questions that there may be. So as I go through this, feel free to add questions in the chat as they come up, and I'll either answer them on the fly as we go if they're relevant, or we'll circle back to those and address them later. Okay, so a brief look at the agenda for today. So first we will introduce the Rollbar data, what we're focusing on with today's conversation, and what is all out there and available. And with that, there's a couple of features that we usually call on specifically. So feature tracking, or excuse me, people tracking. That's a core part of the support persona's life in Rollbar, and that's one that a feature that we suspect is underutilized. And with people tracking, that data is also saved in the RQL tables. RQL is what we call the Rollbar query language. This is the first time that we will have covered that in a Rollbar Academy session, and our attendance is higher today. It makes me wonder if that's got anything to do with it. And then we will we'll finish up with a little bit on the API, where we have current functionality, some of the automation that we've started to formulate, some of the things that we've tinkered with as a customer engineering group. All right, so let's get started. So what data is available in Rollbar? We have all of the item and occurrence data. So all the things that you work against, items are the primary working item in your Rollbar account. I should not use that term. The primary working component, the thing that you're usually focusing on and investigating the most. So those items are comprised of occurrences. The occurrences are where we get the bulk of our data and our information about what's happening in the code. The occurrences, the stack traces, and if you choose to send log events to Rollbar, those as well would be considered occurrences. And all of that data is persisted in a very large data table where we keep all of the occurrence info, and we store that for later querying. So for those that aren't familiar with RQL, we'll do some combination awareness generation and then some training with that as well. Then the people data, we'll cover that specifically as its own topic. So it's really just 3 different fields, but through that, those and the way that they are correlated to the occurrences that report to the people data, it gives you a good idea of specific user stories, UX degradations, the things that you may be getting support tickets about. And then the version data, that's where we can try to track version health and build on some advanced statistics. I think the DORA metrics that have come up recently with things like deployment frequency, there may be one in there about code health. I can't remember, to be honest. But within Rollbar, what you can do is you can see each code revision, you can see the aggregate stats for the number of items caused. Maybe you can tie that into your CI/CD process and some of the other operations that are occurring outside of Rollbar and get better insight from that. So try to uncover as much of that as possible. And let's just go ahead and start with people tracking. So this is one of a few features that we do not have in our standard configuration. When you go to install Rollbar, your first project or any project after that, the instructions that are built in don't include this. And we're having a little bit of a debate about that now as to how best to add that. But people tracking, this, again, it ties in the specific personas, the people using the application or the code, and it reports the given errors that come into Rollbar with that information so that there's a clear correlation there. It ties who is affected to what event affected them. And there's, like most things in Rollbar, there's a bidirectional investigation flow. We'll look at that in just a second, but first I do want to demonstrate how we get that people data in. So I have just a very rudimentary demo page here. And this demo is actually set up to allow for dynamic people data, where I can just populate that up at the top here. I can add in an ID. ID is the required field for people tracking. And then these two are optional. You don't have to always supply a username or an email. And for privacy purposes, when there's concerns about PII being exposed, then folks will just use the ID because you don't want to correlate that to something that's identifiable like an email address. So I can log in here, and then as I generate these errors, this is a demo, it's designed to do exactly that. We'll throw some stuff across there. These items that come through will then have new people data tied to them. So I should see something about that ID in there. If I look at this, can't find variable message. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of folks that have experienced that within this particular project. So now if I wanted to click into this, there's sort of a story here. I can follow that through. Let's see if I can maybe add new events to that. See if we can send one here for the respond with. I can't remember if I turned off some of the page defaults where I have to reload or not. So we'll just do that manually. But this is about as dynamic as it gets. And hopefully this makes sense to how we might capture that. It's very, very easy to capture dynamic people data because most of the time the session is going to tell you about that. For any web app, there's usually credentials involved. And if that's the case, you've got your info right there. So now another one that has come through respond with, of course, we'll see some of the occurrences, and the people data shows this persona. And now we've got sort of a historical trend. It's in reverse chronological order, but this is a view of sort of the person drill down. And so we have a separate menu for people tracking. It's anchored to the left margin. It's got sort of a double filter here. Don't ask me why. But I can select that JS demo project. Here are all the people in the production environment. And I've done a few in here, and I can see exactly, what happened and what the timestamps were. And this, it's important to note, this is occurrence by occurrence. It's not item by item, because we see here that is not defined. That would be one item, but this provides a more detailed view of what occurred and when. If it was just grouped by item, they could have one at the beginning and the rest may have happened after some other critical events, and we wouldn't see that. But here we're able to see the full story. So if Rollbar seems like it could be helpful, if it is a B2C application for you, then think about getting this people data set up and bringing in support or other customer success personas that may be the first line of awareness for those things like the tickets. If they're sending across support tickets with no context and no info, then the engineer is doing all of the investigation. But with this, we can paint a pretty clear picture of why they're upset. And if it's a code problem, we should be able to see that from the occurrences. And they may tell us that it's a session problem or a user error problem. There's that's where gathering the information is the best thing you can do. So hopefully that helps to illuminate people tracking. Again, feel free to just drop in questions as we go here. This provides a pretty neat little segue into RQL, so we'll go ahead and pivot over to that. So looking in here at a person drill down, I showed the occurrence list, and there's an option here to explore this as an RQL query. So we do have RQL built into the web app. Again, it's another menu that we have anchored to our left margin there. And I can directly go into the RQL menu from that button. And in this case, it's already run the query. So here we see this is the full table of data, and it's very much just going to mimic what we saw before. In this case, we have all of the columns there. So if I really wanted to drill into this, there's a bunch of data that we've got here. Some of this links externally. So here in the code version, that is going to link me to GitHub. And this, I think, is just a nice little scrape of the surface for what RQL can really do. So the menu here, again, there's a filter. You can control which projects are being queried here. It can be multiple, or it can just be a single project that you want to query against. And that dramatically impacts performance. So narrowing that down is important for when you can do that. And here it's pre-constructed a query. The syntax is one of the things that people struggle with, myself included, when it comes to writing SQL or RQL queries. It's basically just a SQL-based language. I think there's a few nuances, maybe formatting things, but we do have our own documentation for this. So the docs domain explains the syntax, and it also introduces the schema that we have. So the item occurrence table is the main one, and that's going to have all of the item info. And it will even save all of the custom data fields that you may choose to add to your occurrences. So small little tangent here for those that don't know this. I think I've mentioned it in other Rollbar Academy sessions, but it sort of flies under the radar as well. You have the option to add any custom key value pairs that you want to your Rollbar config. And then if you send items across with that data, then you'll be able to see those custom fields as a part of the occurrence data. So for this, I'll refresh, and then I'll send across a test item just to demonstrate that foo bar pair is now a part of that. So let's see, which tab am I going to steal? And this, I'll keep this brief since it's basically its own point of discussion, but the whole custom data thing, it allows you to open up the customization of it a lot more. You can write your own fingerprinting rules. You can route alerts based on this data, a number of things you can do with that. So with that, that foo bar is also going to be in RQL. I think, let's see if it's possible to query this in a performant way. Yep. So we've got some foo bars here, and then the rest of them, it's just picking up null. So that's a custom column. If I just did a select star from item occurrence, see if I can add in some time bounding, we'd be able to see that as a row of custom data. So all nifty little tricks that we can do here. So, we've got specially formatted columns there, extra data. This was one from a sample that came through. And then there's our foo bar there as well. So this, there's obviously a lot you can do with a query language in a relational database or something that's similar to that. So I encourage folks to explore this on their own. I did put together a few sample queries that should be more useful than this one. So I'll grab a few of those right now and see if we can make use of them. So for one of these, I'm actually going to use the meta Rollbar account, Rollbar's view of Rollbar's data. And for this, we're going to do a deploy frequency chart using RQL. So just to review the query, the deploy table, the schema has that listed separately. So it's much smaller as far as it's not as wide. There's much less columns to that table. And so deploy frequency, we can track that here. And I think for this one, yeah, because we're grouping by 2 fields, we have to transpose this a little bit. But here, in this case, what we're actually doing is not number of deploys per week. So it's project slug, which tells us what project, a week time bucket there. And then we're going to look at the number of unique revisions. So this is the number of unique versions in a given time period. And that's counted from deploys. We don't care about the number of unique deploys because it could be the same version over and over again. And we're matching on just prod-like environment tags. So here, x-axis, we set that to the week. In a perfect world, I would have had a little bit of time to format these to maybe read as week values, but that'd be pretty difficult to do as well. And so there, if I choose the series to be the project slug, now we're seeing on a week by week basis. I think I need to sort that in reverse order, yeah. Oops, I'll just back up. So with this, this is a very important thing for those DORA metrics, deployment frequency and the number of new versions that we see come through. So being able to visualize this right here in the app, this is pretty valuable. I actually just learned this query within the past week and been kind of excited to show that off. So in this case, it's actually going in reverse chronological order, but hopefully the point rings through. So each one of these different projects, I can see how many versions were pushed in a given week. There's a lot of zeros in here that are showing as nulls. So would do some fill missing operators in there too, maybe to try to put those zeros in there and establish some continuity on those lines. All right, so I've got a few more that I'll drop in. Won't spend too much time on this if there's not any questions, but I do encourage folks to ask any that they have. So any custom queries you're wondering about in RQL, there's a very small chance that I'd be able to construct one on the call today, but maybe there's some follow-up, could at least talk through some of the syntax that might be required for something like that. So this is another interesting one. I can actually do this on my personal account. So I'm going to move away from Rollbar data. And this is basically just saying, I want to know the first and the last time that a version showed up in an item. Or maybe I copied a different one. Oh, no, yep, got that wrong. This is about session time, sorry. So this is listing users by average and maximum session length. So here in this JS demo project, we can see there's some pretty long sessions here, probably from the way that I leave my browser windows open while I'm doing these demos. So yeah, it's a lot of milliseconds that go into a session like that. I think my JavaScript project has some more realistic numbers, maybe in some cases at least. But it's also got more people data. So we can see here, there's the same user for the different environments, but we also see all these different person entities and the different times that they've had. So, all right, so I'm going to do that one last one, the one that I just described erroneously. So this is the version thing, the first and last time that we saw a code version based on it being reported through items. And while I'm waiting on this, it looks like it's queued. I'm waiting on this query to get a spot to run. This gives me a perfect opportunity to explain that. So there's a limit on the number of concurrent queries you can have going within an account. And the UI as well, this menu that I'm using to run these, the RQL menu that we have here on the web app, this is, it's still kind of an early development feature, mostly in the performance area. For larger accounts, for enterprise accounts that have very large tables of data for things like item occurrence, the queries that you run here in the web app are going to be very slow. So we do have API endpoints to do the same thing. You can create an RQL job, then you have to poll it to check its status, and once it's finished, you can get those results. So that's that's a little bit of a process there, but on top of the automation benefit, this is going to be much more performant. The results are going to come back much faster because the query itself will run fast. It's a bottleneck for the UI. Basically, it's not enough data transfer can happen to get what is being generated from the query to the UI quickly enough. So I'm wondering if I left a couple of tabs open or something. I wouldn't expect to have a queue that long for my query, but I have to circle back to that, I suppose. All right, so if there's no questions about RQL, then we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic. We'll talk more about the API and some of the ways that it can be leveraged. So let me make sure I didn't leave off any important points from my slides. I usually write them and then don't use them all that much. So yeah, nothing revolutionary here. It's all what I've talked through with RQL. And then for the API functionality, so the RQL job, obviously being able to run those jobs in an automated fashion, that's going to save some folks a good bit of time. And then on top of that, there's a lot more we can do with the API in its current state, and we still have a lot of development to do to get this up to be fully robust. So we are very much still working on this, and happy to take feature requests and suggestions to this. Let me just paste in the URL for anyone that may be curious to explore this on their own. Sorry, I've usually got support, but my helper for the day has no internet connection right now. So I'll try to backfill some of the links for the things I've shown here as well. The API in general, it's a REST API. It's the analogy I've used for APIs before, for REST APIs, is kind of like a vending machine. If you know which buttons to push, aka if you know what parameters to supply, and if you get the right credentials, aka the the money or the cost, then it's going to give you what you want. It's automated. You can count on it to do it pretty much every time. I would say an API more so than a vending machine. But let's make sure that it's clear what is currently available and what's not. Most recently I've been heavily involved in Terraform stuff, so I tend to drift towards these bottom endpoints, the ones that have to do with Rollbar infrastructure and the Terraform provider. But we do have some good automation capabilities in short-term changes as well. Things like updating an item, if you want to change an item's status or its severity level, that is API supported. So I will take a second to answer the question that we just got in the Q&A, which is, what is an RQL job? So yeah, just to clarify, an RQL job is that query, and it's specifically the query as it lives in that very short life cycle of being created and being processed and then being retrieved. So that's the entirety of an RQL job. It only exists to call the API, and this architecture of query jobs, in older cases, and I think in some APIs, you can just query it directly. You wouldn't have to send it a string and a bunch of parameters and then check the status. But this is sort of a load balancing and a way of protecting these endpoints from very expensive queries coming in. With the job protocol, it gives us, with our backend resources, more control over what we can process at a given time. So it's a little bit of its own animal here. There may be some good stuff online. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, it's sort of a 3-step process. If it goes smoothly and quickly, then you create the RQL job, and a part of that is the query string. So that's where your select from, all that logic goes in the query string. Then to check the job, you basically, after that job has been created, you'll run this command, and it will return a status. And usually the status is done if it's a short query, or a success, excuse me. And once you get to that success status, you either repeat while it's running, or once you get to success, you know that it's good to go. So, your automation would be checking that status. And when it came back correct, then you would go to the next command, which would be the get command, to pull down the results. So let me know if there's any more clarification needed for that. But since that's API related and we were just on RQL, I thought that would be useful to cover there. So looking elsewhere here, we have these other examples. We've got a few things in GitHub that you may enjoy using, or it may be helpful to learn from some of this stuff. So that's pretty cool. I actually never clicked into that, so I'm glad to know this is there now too. Yeah, ping tool at the top, just if you want to know that it's working. And I think ours will return the word Pong back. Yeah, so it's fun. So what else in RQL? What else in the API? So source maps. This is important for minified JavaScript. The best way to get your source maps into your Rollbar account is to add a curl command to your deploy script that's going to post that source map to the Rollbar endpoint with the correct parameters. So there's a blog post. I think it's, if you just search Jenkins Rollbar, then it will come up as one of those first results. I'll paste this into the chat. Oh, I pasted my other link as just panelists, so I'll fix that too. So there's that first one, and there's the Explorer link. Sorry about that. I pasted it in a way that it was only visible to me. But here on this blog post, the important thing I was going to point out here is there's a pre-built curl command. You can copy this into your deploy script and then just fill in the parameters there. And it's pretty easy. Oh, sorry. This is for the source maps there. So I'm posting those in. But you can also notify Rollbar of your deploys. So that's the notify. And then I think the source map command, you can build that in as well. Sorry, I got myself a little turned around there. So those two separate things. You have the option to notify Rollbar of your deploys, and that's how you populate your deploy tracking menu in your Rollbar account. this can only be done externally because we don't run our own deploys. So as a part of a deploy script, just to clarify, this would be required to notify Rollbar. And then as a second command, you could choose to upload your source map. Those would usually be done together since they're both Rollbar components. All right, so yeah, the API, I won't go through every category and every endpoint. You do have some project control over these things. That's where Terraform comes into play. The project teams and users relationships, basically everything from projects down to this last association link. Those endpoints are all a part of the Terraform provider. So, brief introduction to Terraform. It is an infrastructure tool. It's infrastructure as code, and basically it allows you to take a declarative resource structure, the desired state of your Rollbar infrastructure, and you can create that. This is a different endpoint, so let me provide a little bit of context here. The versions API, this is a good endpoint that I didn't really mention. It provides a lot of item data from an endpoint in a nice constructed fashion. So when things come back from this versions endpoint, you can, for a particular version, see all of the item stats as far as how many new items have been introduced, how many are repeated from an older version, how many have been reactivated after they were marked as complete. So all of these statistics that we have kind of roll up. And so this is a very informative endpoint. It provides a lot of stats. And in particular, the version health statistics are going to help us determine when to roll back a deployment. If a deployment has gone bad, if it's introducing too many errors, then we need to go ahead and cut that off. And so this Python script that I have here, it's basically going to check against a given version and environment to see if a given threshold has been met of a number. In this case, it's new items per version. And if I look at the command here, let me enlarge this a bit. So this Python script with the parameters that it takes. So the access token, of course, I tell it what version, what environment that I'm going to be checking here. And then I can give it my threshold, the number of times to check, and the number of seconds between each check. So for CI/CD processes, for a live deploy, we may say that up to 5 errors are tolerable, but anything beyond that is not. So maybe 6 is my threshold. And because with a new deploy, those errors come in frequently and it can happen every few seconds, then we may need to do this repetitive check a number of times. For demo purposes, I keep it short and the number of check seconds low to show that it is quickly taking those actions. But here I'm looking at the same version. My number of new items is 10. I've set my threshold at 6. So of course it fails. It immediately says 10 is greater than 6. This version's not up to snuff. And this is just one piece of automation in what's a larger process. What this is saving us from having to do is monitor the version stats. I could sit and watch this screen. When there's a lot of stuff reporting in, this will be a live dashboard and we can see these shifting around and see which ones bubbled up to the top and the numbers will change. But that's tedious. If I'm trying to track a specific version and it keeps bouncing up and down the list, if nothing else, it's just frustrating. So automating that with this script, it's very specific. It's sort of singular in what it attacks at this point. We've got to build some scale into this, but hopefully this is helping to reveal the capabilities of the data that you've already got. It's not a matter of generating this data. It's just a matter of understanding how best to utilize it. So the versions API, it's one of the better endpoints for getting operational data from your Rollbar account. Of course, RQL is the open-ended way to do that. I would be able to get all of the data from this endpoint and all the data that I used in this script through an RQL job. But of course, there's no point to do that when there's a specific endpoint available.